The Ontario election is now officially underway. The second now leaders debate will take place on Monday, where all of the political party leaders will be debating each other. Doug Ford, Stephen Del Duca, Andrea Horvath, and Mike Schreiner have all been campaigning across the province since the beginning of the election campaign on May the 4th. Here now to analyze some of the past few days and weeks in the campaign is Alvin Tedjo, who is a former Ontario Liberal Party leadership candidate and Liberal commentator. Melanie Paradis is a Conservative commentator, and Kim Wright is an NDP strategist and NDP commentator. Hello to the three of you, and thank you all for joining me. Alvin, I'll start out with you. Stephen Del Duca, it's fair to say I think that he's, picked up some traction since he was, first elected as leader of the Liberal Party back in 2020. Do you think ultimately, though, that he's picked up enough traction to ultimately win on June 2nd, Election Day?
Well, I think they say the only poll that really matters is the one on Election Day. I think he's picking up some traction, but unfortunately, he was elected leader of the Ontario Liberal Party just before the pandemic started. So for the last 2 years, while he's been trying to introduce himself to Ontarians, they haven't had that chance, and they've seen a lot of the Premier or the Conservative leader in action. I think he's put forward a number of ideas that have piqued people's interest and gotten the attention of the electorate. I think it still remains to be seen if it'll be enough, and we still have several weeks left in the campaign, but I have high hopes.
Melanie, the PC leader, Doug Ford, it seems as if he's limited some of his media interactions over the past little while. He went a couple of days without a media availability, and then during the Northern Ontario leaders debate, he didn't take questions from the media following the debate. Do you think that, the people of Ontario are paying close enough attention that may be something that could potentially impact, their vote, or do you think Ontarians are, for the most part, focused on policy?
Well, the weather's been nice lately. I think a lot of Ontarians have been getting outside and trying to return to life as normal after the past 2 years. And you're right, people aren't really paying much attention right now. I think that people will start to pay a lot more attention after the long weekend, or maybe right before the long weekend, but right now it's still early days. The media hasn't really been covering this election all that much compared to other things, compared to, for example, the federal Conservative leadership, which seems to be getting a lot more traction than an actual election, a general election. So I don't think that people are paying enough attention right now for it to matter.
And Kim, NDP leader Andrea Horvath, this is, she's ran in numerous elections now. Do you think ultimately that this election will be, the time that Ontarians will, put their trust in her? And ultimately, what do you think she has to do, differently than she's done the past couple of election cycles that she's ran in to ultimately become the next Premier of Ontario?
One of the things that's been really interesting, and I know people like to talk about previous elections, every election campaign, Andrea Horvath has increased her seat count to the point now that she, in the last campaign, was first or second in 100 of the 124 ridings. And these were in places that are not traditional NDP strongholds. And what we've been seeing over the last couple of days has been Andrea going back to those non-traditional places where she does really well and really connects with voters and getting out on the ground. And whether that's in Ottawa, West Nepean, or Nipissing, or Barrie Innisfil, and we saw her today in a Chatham, Kent Essex, Windsor swing. Those are all battleground spots that she is playing for keeps in.
And Alvin, Liberal leader Stephen Del Duca, he's been, generally the, main theme of his day seems to be doing press conferences in the morning, and then in the evening, he'll do meet and greets with supporters. Do you think ultimately, obviously, 2018 was a fairly hard election year for the Ontario Liberal Party. Do you think that, Stephen Del Duca and the way that he's been campaigning is ultimately, enough to bring them from the third party in the legislature to, bring them back to the government, which is obviously what Liberals across the province want?
Yeah, I certainly hope so. I mean, I think the Liberals, the Ontario Liberals, are certainly gunning for government, and you can tell based on their strategy. They've had an announcement almost every morning, followed by as much press as they can get. To your earlier point, trying to get in front of as many eyeballs as possible so that people know who he is and understand the Liberal plan. Now, there are a significant amount of new candidates. I think over almost 100 of the candidates running for the Ontario Liberals are new candidates to the Ontario Liberal Party, which is good because that's what the leader was running on. He wanted a new generation of leadership to start running for Ontario Liberals, to move past the past 15 years and look towards the future. I think you've seen a lot of what the other parties are attacking the Ontario Liberals for are for their record, rightfully or wrongly. There are a number of things that the Ontario Liberals did that were great, like canceling gas plants, not gas plants, sorry, the coal plants, closing down the coal plants. And they also made some mistakes. So I think having new candidates out there, as well as new policies to put forward, is going to attract the attention that they need. And hopefully over the next couple of weeks, it's going to gain more traction. But to Melanie's point, people are going to start voting early next week, late next week before the long weekend. So if people aren't paying attention yet, they need to start.
Melanie, I mean, sort of a different question as it relates to the Ontario Green Party. They released their platform, today. They didn't commit to any sort of, a relative deadline as to when they would balance the budget. Stephen Del Duca has, committed that he would try to balance the budget by 2026 to 2027, which is the same as the Progressive Conservatives have done. Stephen Del Duca says, though, that if he can't invest enough money as he wants to in various, education programs, then he would be prepared to exceed that deadline. Do you think some of, the messaging as to, when, the various parties are saying they would balance the budget, do you think that will ultimately play a big role in how Ontarians vote? Do you think Ontarians are looking closely at those numbers and looking at, when each party will ultimately try and balance the budget?
The fiscal conservative in me wants to say yes, but realistically, I think that the majority of Canadians are mostly concerned with reducing the cost of living right now. There was an Abacus poll out yesterday for Ontario that showed that reducing the cost of living is at about 60%. I think it was 59% of Ontarians mark that as like their number one issue, followed by housing affordability and accessibility. Balancing the budget is a goalpost that I think has moved significantly in the post-COVID world. We just went through 2 years of like unprecedented spending. I think people's opinions about both government spending and when we pay down the debt and the deficit has shifted.
And Kim, just finally to you, obviously Melanie's mentioned some of, the economic issues that are at stake in this election, but obviously a lot of people have current concerns around things like environmental issues, healthcare issues, obviously with, the past 2 years with the pandemic. Do you think ultimately that, some of those issues may play a bigger role than, some of the issues around balancing the budget, and to what extent?
Ultimately, what I often say is show me your budget and I'll show you your values. It is where you want to spend those dollars. Is it, Doug Ford talked about ending hallway medicine last campaign. That didn't happen. And wouldn't it have been great during the pandemic if we actually had invested in healthcare? He talked about putting an iron ring around long-term care. And all I saw were family members who were collecting loved ones and hearses, frankly, that were collecting loved ones from long-term care. And then I see what, Stephen Del Duca put out this supposed costed platform this week that had a $5 billion hole in it, which begs some big questions considering they closed 600 schools when they were in government, when Mr. Del Duca was in government, let alone the fact that they didn't invest in long-term care.
Okay, Alvin Tedjo, Melanie Paradis, and Kim Wright, thanks all for your time tonight and for providing some of your insights as to the Ontario election that will be underway still for the coming weeks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Wyatt.
Thanks, Wyatt.